What's up? Hello, and welcome to another edition of the St. Strength Podcast. I'm Willie, as always. Today we're going to be doing a little bit different episode for you guys. We wanted to ask a couple of guests on and really reflect on the legacy that AJ Green left as a Cincinnati Bengal. We're going to be joined by Bengal Jim and Mo Egger here in just a minute. Both of them had really awesome insights on, the legacy AJ Green leaves in Cincinnati and really what he meant to the city and this fan base. I think you're really going to enjoy their perspective. But before we kind of get into all that, I just kind of want to share a few thoughts on AJ Green. 158 games in the NFL, 727 receptions, 10,514 yards and 70 touchdowns. Pretty incredible career across 12 seasons, but only played 11 due to a freak ankle injury that happened at Dayton's Welcome Stadium. Mo Egger and I are going to get into that in just a minute, so you guys have that to look forward to. But just wanted to show a lot of love for AJ and what he was for this city, because I think that Cincinnati at the time he came into town was really looking for that real humble, hungry, hard worker to come reignite the fan base. He was the 4th overall selection in 2011. They made the playoffs his first 5 years in Cincinnati, which isn't nothing. There are moments in there, though. I mean, not winning a playoff game, the injuries down the stretch that might hold him out of the Hall of Fame and likely will hold him out of the Hall of Fame, but still goes down as a top 3 Bengals receiver of all time, which isn't saying a lot considering some of the legends this franchise has had, and ranks 2nd in a majority of the Bengals receiving statistical categories to Chad Ochocinco all time. So incredible career for AJ Green. A guy that I'm sure we'll see around town. I hope he gets a Ring of Honor opportunity. I think he will. And it would be great to see him sometime as the ruler of the jungle. I think that we'll remember him really fondly as a Ravens killer and as a class act in the city. From there, I want to go ahead and jump in with Mo Egger and Bengal Jim, but thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope that you enjoy these interviews and get to learn a little something new about AJ Green you might not have known already. All right, well, joining us now on the Same Old Stripes podcast, somehow a first-time guest. I can't believe we haven't had him on before, but a great time to bring him on. You know him from his presence on the tailgate scene, doing all kinds of great stuff, and if you are a Bengals fan, it'd be a miracle if you hadn't run into him at this point. But if you haven't at this point, Bengal Jim joins us on today's show. Really excited to have him on the show. Before we get into everything, how are things, man? How's life?
Life's good, brother. Life's good. Season cut a little short on us this year, but two back-to-back great years for us. But I just want to let you know, Willie, how long have you been doing your podcast?
A year and a half, I think.
Okay. I've been waiting every week for this invite, and I finally get the message, and I couldn't respond quick enough. So I appreciate the invite, brother. It means a lot.
It's so fun. I was trying to save you for a good opportunity to get your first appearance, and I just felt like this one, and then we'll have you on like 8 times between like now and this time next year. So that's how that kind of goes. But
no worries. But I thanks for the invite, man. It means a lot.
Right on, brother. Well, I'm excited to have you on because I think we're both kind of excited to talk about. It sounds like both of our favorite Bengals receivers, and potentially one of our favorite. Everyone's kind of one of their favorite Bengals of all time at this point. AJ Green announced his retirement earlier this week, and I think for a lot of Bengals fans, it was kind of nice to not have to think about, AJ Green's playing for a different team. But for me, it was just it was cool to see a guy hang it up kind of on his own terms at this point. But we can kind of get into some of those different aspects before we kind of talk about some of the, we'll get into a lot of reflective things. But I'm just kind of curious. What are some of your favorite memories or the things that pop into your head about AJ Green's time in Cincinnati? Because I know you watched a lot of those games from your seats and, from the seats at other stadiums. But I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts on that and some of your memories.
It's crazy. The first thing that pops in my head when you say the name AJ Green is class. This guy, we'll talk about how outstanding he was on the field, but this guy handled himself on and off the field with just extreme class, other than one time in Jacksonville, which I'm sure we'll talk about here. But, I was at that game, but this guy, when you talk more about him, is like this guy, to be honest, probably made Andy Dalton, right? Him and Andy Dalton came in the league at the same time. Thank goodness AJ was here with Andy. I think that really helped out Andy a lot. Those two had just a chemistry there. But the other thing I think about is, he's the Raven killer, man. This dude averaged more yards against the Ravens than anybody else in our division, had more touchdowns against the Ravens than anybody else in our division. And he had, I don't know the number, but it seemed like every catch he made against the Ravens seemed to be in a critical time, a huge situation, whether it be a touchdown to end the game or a Hail Mary or a big play. He had more big plays against the Ravens than anybody. And I just posted something on social media right before we came on, Willie. It was John Harbaugh in 2015 after, I think, AJ went off for 200-something yards on him. His quote was, "One of these days we'll figure out how to cover AJ Green. It'd be nice if we did it before he retires." John Harbaugh, how'd that work out for you? He's retired and you still couldn't cover that man. So this guy had just an outstanding career in Cincinnati, handling himself with class, but he will always be AKA the Ravens killer.
I think that the Ravens fans would be the first to admit that's part of the reality. And John Harbaugh would say it himself. They weren't shy about it, about their retirement. They were just as happy to see AJ Green go as anyone.
Right.
But I think you put it really well. I mean, he was the Ravens killer. There's no doubt about it. And, maybe they could have used, Sam Hubbard apparently found his own way to channel the AJ Green magic in that playoff game. But, just a tremendous career and, a lot of big games inside this division. A few more could have come against Pittsburgh, but I'm not doing that conversation today. Same old stripes. We have the name, but I'm trying not to unpack the old trauma that we get into sometimes. I think that one of the more interesting parts about the whole AJ Green, story is kind of how it reset this franchise. And I'm going a little bit different direction here than I thought I was going to go. But at a time when Carson Palmer was asking out, and we knew this was going to be a real sea change for this organization and this franchise, and what everything looked like. How important do you think it was for AJ Green to be that, first pick of the change? He was that 4th overall pick in 2011. And from there, it really just felt like, it didn't slow down until 2016, really.
Yeah. If you remember during that time, Chad going out the door, Carson Palmer just being a straight, whatever you want to call the guy. Obviously one of my all-time most hated Bengals personally, Carson Palmer. We don't need to talk about that right now. But, you got to put him in the same sentence. AJ, that first round pick that year, and then Andy Dalton. There was a lot of upset people going into that, like, oh, we got a rookie quarterback, we got a rookie receiver, 4 or 5 year straight year run in the playoffs there with those two leading the way, and AJ Green just lighting it up, man. Just an amazing run he had with this organization. Wish he could have finished out here. But at the end of the day, that's today's NFL. That very rarely happens. But that was a dark time in Bengals history. That could have, I think, a lot of Bengal fans felt we were just going to go in this dungeon again back in the '90s, that lost decade of the '90s after Carson left and Chad left. And thank goodness for AJ Green at the end of the day, because they elevated this team when we thought we were going to go in another direction during that time.
Yeah, I remember being a young kid. And for whatever reason, I was just, as soon as they had AJ Green in the adult, I'm like, they're making the playoffs this year. And everyone told me I was crazy. But you know what? Looking back on it now,
you can see the future. Hell yeah.
Oh, yeah. For whatever reason, when I was like 13 or something, just had that magic little tick in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you actually kind of touched on a point that I wanted to jump into next, which is, wished he could have finished out his career here. Obviously, he didn't. It ends with a 2-year stay with the Arizona Cardinals that I think – there were certainly a few ups in there, but mostly it was a very quiet stay. And for him to go out after a year like this, which was an absolute disaster in Arizona, it kind of makes me sad for him. But I'm just kind of curious. First of all, I'm just kind of curious about, do you remember how you kind of felt when AJ Green first announced he'd be leaving to go to the Arizona Cardinals? We kind of knew he'd be leaving, but I think there was some finality there to it. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious on your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, I think the team actually tried to keep AJ. AJ wasn't having it. You had a rookie quarterback coming in. He didn't want those growing pains again. A lot of fans get on the organization for letting Andrew Whitworth go. The Bengals thought he was an older lineman at the time. The Bengals were making in their minds a calculated bet that he wasn't going to continue that much longer. They made a mistake there. They did make a mistake with AJ Green. They tried to re-sign him. They wanted him to retire as a Bengal. I I was upset the way he went out. I know it didn't go out on the best terms. I think nothing less of AJ Green, man, because this is about this NFL career is not a very long career. You got to make as much money in a short period of time as you possibly can. And AJ played longer than most receivers lifespan in the NFL, and he got a couple extra years in Arizona, which, to be honest, we're nowhere near in the same par what he was here in Cincinnati. So the Bengals organization made the right decision here, trying to get him in here and paying at the level he should have been paid. AJ, when you get to the end of your career, sometimes your mind says one thing and your body says something else. And that's kind of where it was with AJ. But I think nothing less of him. He's going to be remembered as a Cincinnati Bengal, not an Arizona Cardinal. So I'm okay with it.
And then just to kind of put a bow on that kind of idea of it, I think that one of the more interesting things, and I'm just interested to hear your reaction to his quote about this, him saying and his wife saying that now we get to be Bengals fans again. How cool did you think that quote was?
Well, just to let you know, knowing a little bit more detail about that, he was always a Bengals fan, even in Arizona. He was always rooting for the Bengals when they weren't playing against each other, which never happened. I can't remember if they played against each other. I think they did.
I don't think they did.
He was always rooting for the Bengals, but now he can publicly come out and say that. The Bengals are the one who drafted him. This is where he made his career, the bulk of his career, and was so damn successful, and will absolutely be a Ring of Honor in Paycor Stadium at some point here soon. I unfortunately don't think he's going to get into the Hall of Fame, but he's absolutely going to be in the Ring of Honor here in Cincinnati.
So that'll transition us kind of to our last point here. I want to talk about AJ Green's legacy and the hierarchy of the whole Bengals scheme. As you and I know, and everyone listening to this podcast knows, the Bengals have had some damn good wide receivers throughout their history. You said, AJ Green deserves a place in the Ring of Honor. I think he's got to be there. I'm going to hold the ranking for a second, but I'll ask you another question. Where do you think he ranks among those Bengals that are going to be in the, that second wave of the Marvin Lewis era? I'm curious about where he stands among those guys in your head. I mean, do you even put ahead of me at someone like Geno or?
You're not talking. Okay, you're talking about not just receivers, but just overall.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a great question, Willie.
Geno, curveball to you.
Yeah. No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, that's a great freaking question. Geno's in that mix. AJ's in that mix. Man, I don't know who else on that team would be.
I mean, Pac-Man's on like a B tier on that. Vontez is like a B tier on that. Like a lot of those guys that you start thinking, like even Andy's probably on like the B tier of that.
Andrew Whitworth. Yeah, I think maybe I know he played the bulk of his career here. I think those three right there. I wouldn't rank any of those three one over the other, but man, those are three damn good ball players Marvin had on his team during that time too.
Oh yeah, man, the three guys in their prime, those three that was something. What a run!
None better.
Amazing they didn't win a playoff game. But again, totally other podcast for a totally different.
See, I'm still in counseling after this last playoff loss, Willie. So I don't want to talk about other playoff losses.
Yeah, well, the playoff loss recollection can happen sometime around the time the Bengals win the Super Bowl next year.
Exactly.
I'm not on wood right now.
It's funny. I think just to kind of give you a quick where I place AJ Green in the history of Cincinnati football history here.
Let's do that.
So look, I guess now I'm the older guy in this damn conversation, right? So I got to see Isaac Curtis, I got to see Carl Pickens, I got to see Chad, and I got to see all these guys. And it's really hard to compare receivers from different eras, right? In my personal opinion, Isaac Curtis is the number one receiver in Cincinnati Bengals history. He changed the game in the NFL. The Chuck rule, the Steelers always, complained about Isaac, and the NFL changed the rule because of Isaac Curtis. They only threw the ball 15 to 17 times a game in the 70s during the bulk of Isaac's career. So this guy was something special, a game changer. If Isaac, with his skill set, played in today's NFL, Hall of Famer, beyond question, right? So I put Isaac Curtis number one. And here's what's interesting. Isaac Curtis is not going to put the stats up that Chad Johnson and A.J. Green did. Different era of football, that completely different. But A.J. Green is number two in yards behind Chad, number two behind receptions behind Chad, number two behind touchdowns behind Chad, and he's number one in yards per game. I put Chad Johnson number two, and I put A.J. Green a close three at the end of the day. So what's really hard is that doesn't mean you're talking bad about Chad or I'm sorry, AJ or Carl Pickens even, because I think he should be in the top 4 discussion for sure. You're not talking bad about any of those guys. We're talking about the best of the best. And my ranking, clearly in my mind, is Isaac Curtis, Chad Johnson, and AJ Green, and I put Carl Pickens at 4 at the end of the day. So some damn good receivers, man. We've had way more receivers than that were special, but those guys were very special in their eras.
I mean, and I think that kind of says everything about AJ Green on a franchise that's, for long stretches been defined by these wide receivers, and
Right.
entire eras defined by wide receivers. I think for AJ to even be in that conversation for one of those top 3 spots says just how impactful he was during his 10 but 9 seasons in Cincinnati. We're going to have Mo Egger on later in the show to talk about the Welcome Field incident up in Dayton. All that and the madness of all that. But I think AJ Green, when you look back on it, it's going to be very kind to him in history. I think you're still going to see a lot of number 18 jerseys at the stadium. Next year, I think you'll see him 30 years from now when people are passing down their jerseys to their kids. So, man, you said at the top, I think that the class aspect to me is always what's going to stand out.
Yeah, this guy was one of the classiest Cincinnati Bengals player to ever put on the orange and black. The stuff he did outside the community for the community that people never even heard about. He did it with a quiet grace, just like he did on the field. The one time he loses his mind, and Jalen Ramsey down at the Jacksonville game just happened to be at that game as well. That was the only time that he stepped outside his class at the end of the day. But you know what? I don't think anybody in the NFL had a problem with that situation because Jalen Ramsey was an ass.
Still one of the funniest videos that pops up on the internet every now and then. Bengal Jim, you've been a fantastic guest on today's show. Do you want to tell everyone where they can find you and your show and everything?
They can find me anywhere they want. Just type in Bengal Jim somewhere. I'll be there. Social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, but Instagram. But I appreciate it, Willie. It means a lot, man. Houday, and man, I can't wait to get to the hopefully for the announcement tonight for Ken Riley and get to the draft and get through the rest of the year and get to the season here, man. I can't wait to get it going again. I got a feeling we're going to be have a lot of fun in Cincinnati here for the next 10, 15 years.
I tend to agree. I think it's going to continue to be a fun run. All right, man. Good luck to you tonight with your broadcast and the Ken Riley story. I hope everything goes the way we all hope. And Houday.
Houday, buddy. Thanks again, man.
Yeah. Thank you. Joining us now on the Same Old Stripes podcast. I think he's a repeat guest now. I think we had him on last year for the a little Raiders preview before the playoffs, but you guys definitely know him from a number of radio programs throughout the years and obviously on 3 to 6. Mo Egger joins us today. First of all, thanks so much for having us. How are you doing? How's your week been so far without, second week without Bengals football to talk about?
Weird. It's, we spent so much time leading up to the AFC Championship game thinking about what this week might be like that now it feels empty, right? I mean, we're not supposed to be talking about the offseason yet and Joe Burrow's contract yet and even spending a lot of time on AJ Green's retirement yet. And yet here we are doing those things. That's not where so many of us thought we would be and hoped we would be, but here we are.
Yeah, much like AJ Green's career, a great season met with kind of a funky end. A great career kind of met with a funky end. I do want to start at the beginning with, and obviously this episode is going to be titled like celebrating AJ Green or something. So everyone listening knows what I'm talking about. I'm not going to set it up too much, but I want to start at the beginning with AJ Green. And this kind of popped into my head. You were on Hear That Podcast Growling with Paul and Jay earlier this week. And I think a really interesting point you made is kind of the beginning of the entire AJ Green thing. You mentioned not even really remembering the lead up to the draft and all that good stuff. But I think that it was incredibly impressive the way that AJ Green and that whole team was able to recapture the city after I feel like there was a lot of season ticket holder fallout after 2010 and just a lot of, there was a lot of drift. I mean, the Reds were kind of taking their upswing. But I'm just kind of curious for AJ Green to kind of be the guy that was the figure, and there were other guys in the mix, but the real figure of that renovation for this team. What do you think that says about him, and what do you think that moment means for this team and what the history is now?
Well, it says more than anything he was a great player and great from the get-go. Because when I saw that he retired, and even when he left here, the first thing that I thought of was 2011. And, I know I talked about this with Paul and Jay, and I talked about this on my show as well. But as hard as it might be for some to believe, in 2011, being a Bengals fan might have been the least cool thing ever. The year before, they were so bad, so unlikable. And they doubled down on that by bringing back Marvin Lewis. And you could argue, well, they got it right because Marv then went to the postseason 5 straight years, but that was resoundingly rejected by most fans. Tens of thousands of people turned in their season tickets. Carson Palmer embarrassed the organization by, basically saying, I'd rather go sit on a beach than play for you. ESPN, the magazine, voted them the worst franchise in all the sports. They may still do this, but that's back when they ranked every professional sports franchise 1 through 122. The Bengals were ranked 122. And there was a lockout too, which made it kind of hard for the organization to go in any one direction. And so all this stuff was going on. And I usually have a pretty good memory when it comes to things that we've talked about, things we've spent a lot of time on. I legitimately don't remember talking about the draft that much that year. I remember wondering, is it going to happen? Because there was a lockout. I remember interviewing AJ Green the day after they drafted him because that was, the players could show up at the facility and meet the coaches. And then that was it. They had to move on. Right. So, I remember that, but I don't really remember talking much about AJ Green leading up to the draft. And even once they drafted him, it was like, yeah, okay, what's going to happen with Carson Palmer? Is this Andy Dalton kid really going to be the quarterback? And, even once the lockout was lifted and training camp began, everything it wasn't fun. I mean, there wasn't a sense of anticipation. We thought that team was going to suck that year. And then I remember week 1, AJ Green catches a touchdown pass from Bruce Gradkowski to beat the Browns. And it's kind of like, wait a minute, they won? Who's this 18 guy? And he was such a breath of fresh air, not only because he was quite good and you thought, this guy has limitless potential, but he was kind of the antithesis of Chad. Now, we all love Chad. Chad's the greatest wide receiver in Bengals history statistically. Chad made the Bengals cool in 2004, 2005. It had a better career than I think a lot of people think because they don't really remember what he did statistically. But there had also been sort of the act is wearing thin. Can they just have a guy that comes in and plays and doesn't say anything and doesn't bring unwanted attention? That was AJ Green, right? I said this on the air the other day. Until 2017, I can't tell you one interesting thing that AJ Green said. I mean, and that's not a knock on him. We used to talk about how those teams were so boring, right? But that was kind of by design, and it was kind of refreshing. They weren't making headlines Monday through Saturday. They were just, for the most part, winning on Sunday. And to me, AJ kind of led that. So that's what I think of most when I think of him. He gave the fans a chance and a reason to focus on something positive during a really sort of ugly time. And that 2011 team wasn't especially good, but they found their way into the postseason. They were the first of 5 straight postseason teams, and they kind of recentered the focus back on football, back on what was happening on the field, and back on something that provided hope. And that was badly, badly needed. He's not the only player responsible for that, of course. There's actually lots of guys, but he's the first player that I think of.
So you kind of go into an avenue that I think is kind of interesting, and it just kind of makes me think about, these specific figures in a city that have such a strong impact and such a big connection with fan bases. And from your perspective, you get to talk to all kinds of different fans and all kinds of different people every single day on air, all that good stuff, and around town, all that kind of different stuff. But I think it's obvious at this point that AJ Green has left a significant legacy in Cincinnati. And I think that a way that you can gauge it is you go to the grocery store or even you go to Paycor Stadium and you see number 18 jerseys all over the place to this day. And that's not the same for every Bengal that came through town or every, exciting player that people bought a jersey for in town. What do you think it is about AJ Green that just made such a strong connection with this city? Because not every player is the right player for the city.
I think there was a humility to him. I mean, AJ could be boastful. He said last summer he thought he left 1,000 yards on the field last year in Arizona. I mean, he could be. He was confident, but he wasn't obnoxious. And again, no knock on anybody who preceded him, but it was sort of a breath of fresh air that they had a guy who was really good, but didn't make a big show of being really good. I think there's something that people here appreciate about that. And look, I'm here for boastfulness. I'm here for being entertaining. I'm here for cockiness. I love those things. It's part of why I like the team the Bengals had this year so much. But I just think there was, and also he stayed here. I know he obviously eventually left, but I mean, AJ Green signed here and played the majority of his career in Cincinnati. And I don't really remember there being a lot of worry that he was going to bolt in free agency, but I think athletes who choose to stay here and, quote, go about their thing the right way, I think there's a connection that people have with guys like that. It is interesting, though. It's hard to not talk about those 5 straight years without referencing the fact that they, didn't win a playoff game. And it feels like AJ is sort of above that, right? Like we blame Andy and Marvin and Jeremy Hill and 1,000 other people. AJ kind of doesn't get lumped into that. And, people bring up, iconic AJ Green moments. The real shame of what happened against the Steelers in 2015 was AJ makes this unbelievable play to give them the lead. And I remember at the time going like, there should be a statue of that outside the stadium. Well, then, we all know what happened from there. And so it's now kind of just a footnote. It should be regarded as one of the iconic moments in the history of Cincinnati pro sports. And it kind of gets forgotten, unfortunately. But yeah, I just think, a player who stayed here and kind of, gave people a reason to feel good about the Bengals again. And it, for folks who maybe don't remember, I remember that offseason vividly. I don't know that there's been the turning away from the franchise in droves like there was in 2011. And AJ gave people a reason to care again. And I think that's lingered for the last dozen or so years.
Yeah, I tend to agree. That's actually a really interesting point. I never thought about him kind of being above it, but it does feel like, and maybe it's because he made big plays in some of those games that separates him from it a little bit, but really interesting point there. And it kind of goes with this greater AJ Green balance that I'm kind of weighing in my head, which is, there are some amazing moments, but it does feel like there were some funky moments, especially towards the back end that, overshadowed some of the greatness, especially. And it seems like that's kind of been a little bit forgotten, which is, I think, acceptable for Bengals fans to move on from it. But one situation in particular that I would love to kind of hear your input and some of the thoughts you have on it today, as you can kind of take all the information in and all this. I want to look at 2019. I want to look at one of the early practices of training camp, and it's the one that I think many Bengals fans will remember at Dayton's Welcome Stadium.
Yes.
I, to this day, don't really understand why all that happened. I remember that for years and years and years, they always went to Welcome Stadium. But what do you remember about the madness that was the AJ Green ankle injury, and that was that whole season of will they, won't they, bringing him back? And obviously there was a contract extension hanging over all of that. But I think that's as much a part of the AJ Green story as anything, is that whole crazy incident that happened to this team.
Yeah. Well, here's what I remember about it. At the top, they had it there because it was tied into the NFL's 100th season. And I went to the University of Dayton. I've been to Welcome Stadium. I've covered high school games at Welcome Stadium. I saw my alma mater play at Welcome Stadium. And I remember going, really? And we're going to do that? An NFL team is the turf? Have they put like real NFL grass or field turf down? I don't think so. And then I remember it was a Saturday afternoon. I remember looking at my phone. AJ pulls up lame at Welcome Stadium. And so, but more than anything, the weirdness of the team was terrible that year. They started 0-8, 0-10.
Yeah, I think that was the first Zach Taylor team that took them until December to get a win.
Yes. And there were these reports before games of how AJ was out running on the field and he looked great. And it's like, yeah, it's cool. That's probably because he could play, but he's not. He's not coming back and putting himself on the line when he doesn't have a contract for a team that's going nowhere. And I remember Paul Dehner Jr. wrote a piece, and I don't want to mischaracterize it, but it basically it strongly inferred AJ could play if he wanted to. AJ's fine. And what I remember about Paul's reporting is AJ never shot it down. And I asked Paul about this. I mean, I asked him about it on the air. Like, all right, you go back in the locker room, you write that. Did AJ pull you aside and go, dude, I'm hurt? I can't, no, that never happened. So it got weird at the end. And I hated that it got weird at the end because up until that point, AJ had, I think, a pretty clean record with most of us. But I always say this. I'm a body of work guy. I didn't like the weirdness of 2019. He came back and played here in 2020. And honestly, the only moment I can really remember is the pass interference, the offensive pass interference against the Chargers in Joe Burrow's first start. But yeah, I mean, there were a lot of injuries and it kind of got weird at the end, but that's okay. It rarely ends well. So I'm a body of work guy. The body of work is spectacular. The body of work, AJ Green is a Bengal. He's one of the greatest players to ever play for him. But you do wonder, first of all, what would things have looked like had he been able to stay healthy? He missed a ton of time in 14. He missed a ton of time in 16. He missed an entire season in 2019. And this is no knock on Andy, but what happens with his career if he plays with just a more physically gifted quarterback, right? Because what's one of the moments you think of with AJ Green? Texans playoff game after they don't throw him the ball in the first half, which never made any sense. AJ runs a streak route. He beats his dude. He's in the end zone. Andy airmails it. There were a lot of those. And you can't help but wonder, what if he would have played in a situation where he had a quarterback that had more arm talent? Maybe the career looks the same. Maybe it's not as good. I don't know, but you can't help but wonder. But yeah, the ending was kind of weird, but the ending is usually weird. I mean, there aren't many players in the history of this franchise where the ending wasn't a little weird, whether it's Andrew Whitworth or Chad Ochocinco, possibly here this offseason, Joe Mixon. It's kind of how it works in the NFL. There aren't many, go off into the sunset as a champion and a conquering hero. That really doesn't happen too often. So I just sort of took the ending as the way it petered out as this is how it works. The Bengals are transitioning into something else. AJ's nearing the end. But yeah, that 2019 season was weird because mainly I remember before games, I'd look at my phone and see the beat writers tweeting about how good AJ looked on the field running routes before the game. And it's yeah, he could probably play today if he really wanted to, but he's not. So, but yeah, it got weird at the end.
Yeah. Definitely weird at the end. I mean, there were some injuries in the last couple of years that I think were just, it was hard for Bengals fans to kind of watch a franchise great go out that way. But
sure.
I think for the most part, and where we can kind of wrap up, and my last question for you kind of centers around this, I think the good moments will definitely outweigh the bad moments for AJ Green, even if the most iconic AJ Green play of all time is probably going to be him beating tar out of Jalen Ramsey in Jacksonville. But, to you, as we kind of close here, are there any games or moments in particular in AJ Green's, tenure in Cincinnati that really stand out to you or, really leave a lasting impact on you?
It's interesting. I knew he was always good against Baltimore, but I was looking at his game logs the day he retired. It's insane how good he was against Baltimore. Insane how good he was against that team. The two that stand out to me more than any, the two individual moments, number one in order would be the 2012 game against Pittsburgh. Really weird, tense, low-scoring game. They win, they're in. They're playing the Steelers at Heinz Field. Offensively, they could do nothing that day. Pittsburgh's offense was stuck in the mud. Real tense game. And I remember writing about it being half exorcism, half cathartic that they won the game on a Josh Brown field goal. AJ Green made the catch, a 21, 22-yard catch that set up the game-winning field goal. And I remember when the Bengals got the ball going, all right, find 18. Like, however this ends, if it goes to overtime, if they lose, the ball's got to go to 18. There have been so many moments where at times it was like they're looking to go anywhere but 18, including in the playoff game a couple of weeks later. So I remember that. And the other one would be, because I went to the game, the season opener in 2014. Tyler Eifert gets hurt. They don't have Marvin Jones. Steve Smith, I believe, catches a touchdown to put Baltimore ahead. And then AJ runs a deep route, and he's juggling the ball as he's running down the field. And if I'm not mistaken, that gave them the lead and capped off just a tremendous day for him. I remember that play very well, because it kind of felt like Baltimore was about to seize control of the game and probably win it. And then AJ did what he did. So those two moments, I think, stand out more than most. And I wish the 2015 playoff game moment would be the one we talk about, but unfortunately they lost the game.
They did lose the game, but it's crazy to think about the big moments in AJ Green's career, and none of them result in playoff wins. So
yeah,
I think that's a very interesting situation for him.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that about any number of guys here, right? Yeah. I mean, that's unfortunate, but I don't hold that against him. Yeah, he's an iconic member of this franchise. He'll be in the Ring of Honor one day. I always think it's kind of dumb, when players come back and retire as, a Bengal or whatever. The Bengals really historically don't do that, but he made me feel old. I mean, Paul Doherty wrote about this. It's like, it feels like it just got here. Like, AJ Green's retiring. Like, it feels like he should have 4 or 5 seasons left. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Heck, I was in this room talking about it because it was during COVID when we were debating, do you sign Joe Mixon or AJ Green? And we were framing the conversation around the belief that AJ still had some really good years in him. And my guess is if he wanted to play football next year, he probably could at a reasonably high level, but terrific career. And again, to me, the symbol of being able to turn the page from a really dark chapter in Bengals history to one that, at least in the moment, provided a lot of hope and a lot of promise. And I'll never forget that.
Well, you've been a fantastic guest. I've really appreciated your insight, and I think that people are going to appreciate your thoughts on AJ Green. Any events or anything coming up that you want to promote? I know you got some stuff going on over at Twin Peaks. Anything that you want to let the people know about?
We have a radio show that's on every weekday from 3 to 6. It would dramatically help my ability to feed my child if everybody would listen to it.
There you go. Feed most kids for them. You got to do the work, people. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's on you, folks. If she starves, it's not my fault.
It's specifically the Same Old Stripes listeners. It's make or break, baby.
Yes, let's go. 3 o'clock. Make it happen.
All right. Well, thanks so much, man. I hope you have a great time on the radio from 3 to 6 today in particular.
I'll do my best. Thanks.